As you look at that by industry, manufacturing is in last place. Only 25% were rating their leadership quality of the organization as strong or high. And I think that's pretty sobering. But begs the question of like, well, why is that? Why do we see it being rated so low? And some of it is some of the things that you mentioned, being, well, lack of experiencing in leadership.
Have you ever wondered why some teams hit their targets so effortlessly while others struggle despite having skilled workers? Often, the difference comes down to leadership, and building the right leaders before crises hit is a challenge most manufacturing companies face. Today on the Manufacturing Connector, we're joined by Patrick Connell, Consulting Manager at DDI, a global leadership company that's been helping organizations build exceptional leaders for over 55 years. Patrick will walk us through how their data-driven approach, continuous leadership intelligence, equips manufacturing teams to anticipate challenges, develop the right skills, and make life better for the people on the floor and in the C-suite. Patrick, welcome to the Manufacturing Connector. How are you doing today, my man?
Thank you, Jim. I'm doing great. Thank you for having me be a part of this. I'm excited to get into the conversation today.
We're going to start today, Patrick. We're going to talk about you and DDI a little bit. So share with us a little bit about your journey into leadership consulting and what drew you to DDI overall.
Sure, happy to. And it has been a bit of a journey, to be honest. I'm just kind of was reflecting on that in preparation for our conversation today. I've been in this space, the leadership development, leadership assessment space, about a little over 20 years. I'm personally very passionate about it. Sounds like we share a passion around leadership as well. So that's what really drew me to the space as a whole. But it didn't start that way, to be perfectly honest. I've always been, like a lot of people's career journeys, it's had different twists and turns. But I was always interested in psychology. I really took more of a clinical path, actually, for in sort of my early years and in college, and then just had some different experiences where I realized, I just don't think that's probably the best fit for me motivationally. I think a lot of us have had those moments sometimes in our career. So it's like, well, what do you do, right? And so I really enjoyed psychology. I really enjoyed the concept of human behavior. And so I thought, what other things can I do with that? And so I'd always been interested in organizations, how they operate, how they adapt, the role that leadership plays in that front. So that really led me to a path of industrial and organizational psychology, which at that point I'd been kind of unaware of. It has a lot more awareness now, but this was, 30 years ago. There just wasn't as much around that. And I remember sitting next to actually a classmate in a computer lab, and she sort of said, "Have you ever heard of industrial psychology? You might want to look into that." And it's like, think about these strangers in our lives, right? That we're pretty pivotal in us making a career shift, and we never have a chance to thank them. So if that person's out there, you give them a thank you right now. But that was pretty seminal for me. And so just looked more into it, ended up doing my graduate work, master's and PhD in the space, and then was very interested in the practical side of it, really working directly with organizations, working directly with leaders. And so that's what drew me to Development Dimensions International, DDI for short, in that space. And I've been in various roles on the consulting side at DDI. Currently, I lead our North American consulting operation from that standpoint, and I really enjoy supporting our team, working directly with customers in the manufacturing sector, and then really across all industries too.
That's awesome. I agree. If I had known that industrial psych was a career path 30 whatever years ago, I definitely would have checked that out as a career path. Got a couple of books back there. I'm not going to move my bobbleheads and all that kind of fun stuff, all my toys.
We
to
know
get
it's
to them.
there. We know
Yeah,
it's there.
they're there. And it's fascinating. The concepts, the way that tenets of industrial psych are true, right? So you could be the first person that I've had as a guest on my show here that has that kind of degreed learning and experience. So thanks for being here, man. When it comes to DDI, how did DDI develop this continuous leadership intelligence, and why is it relevant to manufacturers?
Yeah. Absolutely. So really good question. Maybe I'll even start with you and just giving a little color around what do we mean by continuous leadership intelligence
Cool.
as well, right?
Yeah.
So ultimately, that's where we really feel like we have the biggest opportunity to help organizations and leaders in organizations. So, giving them the data, the insight, the tools to help identify what are their leadership challenges, what are the skills, capabilities they need to be building proactively to align to their business strategy, and then giving them the insight, like the data points, to be able to make important leadership decisions, whether that's who to promote, who to hire, who to develop, and also from a succession standpoint as well. So, we feel like we owe our partners, our organizations, our customers, that level of intelligence across multiple fronts and how to integrate insights from important types of leadership assessments and diagnostics with then what are the right way to develop those skills? So as you identify where are my leaders really have standout strengths? Where do they have gaps? Then what are the right tools and development approaches to be able to accelerate and develop those skills? So that's really the backdrop behind it. Manufacturing customers are a big part of our customer base. We work across a number of different industries. Quite frankly, that's really motivating for me and my team to get exposure to different industries. But manufacturing is a really challenging one because there's so many things I think pulling at leaders specifically in manufacturing to be able to, whether it's focusing on the really critical productivity goals, supply chain issues, safety, all that's pulling. And there's a lot of urgency to those pieces, but sometimes it can prioritize the need to really to have strong leadership development programs in place and prioritizing those. And so despite multiple data points that show that that's worth the payoff, right?
Yeah.
It can be sometimes a little bit of a tough sell. And so we've worked with a lot of organizations, specifically in manufacturing, to help them not only kind of create the value proposition within their organizations to do that, but then also put in the right programs and tools to help bring that to life.
That's awesome. And I mean, you've used the word motivation a couple times, not only in your own personal journey and what motivated you there, but with this, what when it comes to motivation for you and DDI, what motivates you when you see these transformations happen in manufacturers through better leadership?
Yeah. And maybe I'll put a couple of trends on the screen too, because I think these will probably resonate with you as well. But we see manufacturing leaders, organizations squarely fitting into, you know, focusing on these really top four priorities from that perspective, especially the ones on the left. Like I'll highlight workforce transformation too. That there's intentionality on why that's the first one on the list.
Hmm.
I think this is incredibly it's mixed in terms of motivation and energy because I think in one case, a lot of organizations in this space, specifically on the manufacturing side, there's energy to thinking about new ways, new skills that are required, how AI is having a huge impact on the types of skill sets they're bringing in from a leadership perspective, but just overall from a workforce perspective, and how that's shifting automation and different demographic types of variables to make sure leaders are equipped with the right skills. So there's energy and motivation, I think there we share that, but it's challenging space and it's a newer space too that we're all navigating together from that standpoint. But that's been probably one of the biggest transformational aspects that, of course, are hitting multiple industries, but especially within manufacturing, where there is a skill shortage. We are seeing high degrees of turnover and attrition, and we're not seeing the same number of maybe younger generation leaders wanting to come in and step into those roles. And so it's requiring a new skill set. It's requiring a new way of working, quite frankly, that we feel like we're in a good position to come alongside our customers to be able to help develop the right programs and put the right things in place. But it doesn't happen in isolation. You know, the
Sure.
supply chain aspect, obviously, such a still critical part of the business. I know you've had other speakers join your podcast that have spoken to the focus on that for good reason, how that aligns with how customer needs are shifting and growing, and how do you align to that in a way that can continue expand and grow the business. So there's motivation across all these, but I think the workforce transformation feels especially relevant right now and is and a key challenge and sometimes pain point too across customers.
I think that and the for the audience, the Gallup State of the Workforce report just was released. And I think talking about some of these problems that DDI sees, right? Some of these challenges and the top priorities for 26, really one of the things you said was younger generations not wanting to lead, right? And part of that skills gap, quote unquote, that we see is not only on the shop floor, but we also see that in these leadership positions. One of the things that jumped out at me, Patrick, in this report, and we're going to focus on DDI and you, but less than half of the world's managers from this report says that they have received management training. And to me, that is a massive problem, right? You've seen it, I see it. We go into these facilities where managers have been made managers because they were the next on the, hierarchy, the next on the org chart. The person in front of them died or retired or, quit, and all of a sudden they're thrust into these leadership positions with zero skill set. They may have been the best machinist or the best welder out there, but they don't know how to lead, and so we end up with this weird kind of issue um with our leadership. What are your thoughts on that whole dynamic and I guess root issue right now?
It really resonates for all the reasons that you mentioned. Obviously, that study by Gallup was, I think, huge in being able to outline a lot of the overall leadership trends. We see a lot of that in our own research as well. We do an annual leadership study as well called the Global Leadership Forecast. Includes perceptions from over 10,000 leaders across industries. And we saw a lot of similar aspects around burnout being a huge factor, especially at the leadership level. With the departure of an aging workforce and having sort of next generation leaders saying, I've seen what my boss and my boss's boss have done in their roles. I don't want that.
Right.
It looks too stressful. I want more balance in my life. And there's actually a term for that, which is kind of taken from some popular terms from the media. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but a term called conscious unbossing, where
No, but
it's
I like it.
right. And so, which that raises some really pretty serious implications as you think about how organizations are trying to grow their leadership pipeline. And if the leaders are exiting at the top with retirements and you don't have the right influx or numbers of younger generation leaders to come in and take their place, that creates a real breakdown from that perspective. But your point around leadership quality and then how perceptions of that, how that's been impacted, especially from a manufacturing lens, I think is a really good one. I've got on the screen, this was one of the findings, our industry findings from our global leadership forecast. And again, these were leader perceptions of leader quality within their own organizations. And you'll see, as you look at that by industry, manufacturing is in last place. Only 25% were rating their leadership quality of the organization as strong or high. And I think that's pretty sobering. Like you'll see healthcare's not that far behind and so forth, but it begs the question of like, well, why is that? Why do we see it being rated so low? And some of it is some of the things that you mentioned being, well, lack of experiencing in leadership development, high turnover in a manufacturing environment. So you have a lot of leaders that are new leaders, or they just have never been exposed to any types of leadership development. It's also really tough to be a leader in manufacturing. I'll just say that straight out. There's huge practical pressures from a productivity standpoint, supply chain issues, safety, that really are almost energy magnets that pull them to focus on really important issues. But it takes them away from prioritizing development for themselves and also for their teams. And then we see a cascaded impact on perceptions of leadership quality as a result.
And so how do those leadership gaps impact performance and safety and productivity specifically? I mean, you alluded to it. What are some of those specific examples?
Let's use your really good insight about being promoted on technical skill into a leadership role, right? Versus leadership skill,
Yeah.
right? So you yourself, Jim, if you were recently promoted based on that in your organization, you can probably, what the right safety procedures are. You've been promoted, so you probably do that well. You're key into how to avoid safety incidents yourself. You're really probably pretty savvy about how to meet your productivity targets as an individual contributor, right? But those are core skill that you as an individual have. As a leader, obviously, you have to be able to build the culture and build the skills and scale the skills across others. And that's a different skill set. It's different from knowing what to do and how to do it yourself. How do you define that vision for your team? How do you identify where the skill gaps are and then provide the right solutions and tools, whether that's some assessments to understand where are the gaps versus where do I really need to develop people and what are the right tools I need to put in their hands to do that? And how do I get the buy-in for that, right? How do I make this feel not like a push, but a pull on how this is integrated into their work? And so that's a different skill set from that standpoint. And that's where we really spend the time in working with, especially manufacturing customers, is what are the right assessments that by level, whether that's a frontline, mid-level, or senior leader, what are the right assessments going to give you insight about your leaders? And then designing the right programs, designing the right tools to be able to come alongside to grow that capability.
Awesome. So I'm sure DDI's continuous leadership intelligence approach addresses these gaps and these challenges. Can you walk us through that?
Absolutely. Let me show you. I'll show you a quick diagram here on the screen that just brings this to life
Hmm.
a little bit more clarity. So, as I mentioned, we're really focused on how are you bringing in the right leadership talent at different levels, and how are you having the right insight to be able to make good decisions about those leaders, especially from a promotional standpoint. And then also, what are the right development experiences, tools, programs to be able to close gaps and continue to accelerate strengths across your leadership, across your leaders, across the whole leadership pipeline. Well, what you'll see here is we really think about it. There's about 5 key leadership levels within organizations. This can look a little different depending on the organization, but in general, you've got your emerging leaders, then those leaders at the front line, leaders of leaders, which is what we really see as the mid-level, and then leaders of the organization as you get to senior and C-level
Got it.
from that standpoint.
Makes total sense.
And so having different types of assessments, that's on the right side of the screen, that are targeting key capabilities, especially as leaders transition to these different levels. What are the skills and capabilities they need to have? And different levels of assessments that are light touch to high touch to get a read on those skills and capabilities. And then different development experiences that, again, are targeted by level, because you need what leaders need. What we know across the board is leaders have asked for those development experiences to feel more personalized, practical, relevant to what they do day to day. And that looks different if you're a frontline leader versus a senior leader or a mid-level leader. So we have different leadership solutions, whether that's content or digital tools that are designed to bring out and develop core skills, but also tailor it to the context of what leaders at different levels need.
So, looking at that emerging leader level, right? You've got the leadership snapshot test, you've got an early identifier assessment. Is that something that an organization would just give to all of their employees, or is it based on something that an employer is seeing out of a potential emerging leader?
Yeah, it depends. It's more targeted in general. So what we work really closely with customers is, well, what is your ultimate outcome that you're driving towards, right? So help us understand what you're ultimately driving towards. So if you say emerging leaders, I need a stronger pipeline. First, I need to identify who has the potential to lead, to your earlier point, not just our strong technical performers, but among our individual contributors, who has some of those early capabilities and who has the motivation to lead. I need a better read on that. So that's where an assessment like early identifier, which looks at potential at that level, that you could use to across all of your individual contributors, and what's most common is a subset of that, more targeted, right? Versus as you go to the front line, a lot of times we'll work with organizations who just I need to understand a better idea of what's my capability blueprint look like at this level. I've got feedback from within the organization about my frontline leaders, but I think I need something objective. And so that's where an assessment like Manager Ready, which is like a frontline leadership simulation that's all technology driven, and that can be customized to focus on the areas that are most important for that organization. But that type of simulation can be typically administered to like a cohort of frontline leaders to understand, okay, well, where are those strengths? Where are the gaps? Where do we have those risks? So it's aligned to the ultimate outcome at organizations after, and there's flexibility and options, whether that's a lighter touch or more heavier touch type of solution.
Okay. And so the assessments are provided, and then an employer has the development paths, which we know are just as important, especially for younger people right now. They want to know how they're going to get to that next level. Am I reading that right?
That's right. So there's kind of on two fronts. There's providing leaders clarity on, well, what needs to look different at
Hmm.
that next level, right? So we call that kind of developing a success profile for what a good frontline leader, the capabilities they need to have. And that's holistic. That's capabilities, that's motivation, that's personality, so forth. So that's usually a really one of the first places we start is helping to define what good looks like. And then it's around, well, how do your capabilities line up with what's needed at that next level? Where do you have natural strengths that you can continue to make sure you're maximizing? And then where are some gaps that we need to help close, especially as you're preparing to make that transition? Or if you're early in that transition, maybe you've already transitioned to a frontline leader level role, but you're still getting your footing in some places, which is quite common. And that's where the assessment can help shed light, and then being able to design the right development experiences for leaders to be able to grow those skills and capabilities.
Awesome. And so, Patrick, who's DDI for? I mean, obviously, I can see this being for enterprise level, hundreds, if not thousands of employees. 80% or so, 75 to 80% of machine shops in this country are 50 and fewer employees.
Hmm.
But they have the same leadership gap that we outlined, the same problem that we talked about. And quite frankly, most of the time, it's harder to flesh out who their leader is. Is this also for those smaller shops, those small to mid-sized businesses?
It is. We work across the full spectrum, small businesses all the way up to large global organizations. I'd say our ideal client profile is organizations that are usually around 1,000 employees because, again, we're focused on leaders specifically. And so having a decent amount of leaders to be able to target those solutions too, that tends to be a kind of a sweet spot. But we, as you'd highlighted, that a lot of the challenges are the same. As
Hmm.
you get to large organizations, obviously they're thinking more about scalability. How do I reach a broader audience of leaders? But a lot of the capabilities, the leadership capabilities, really are the same. Especially as you look at frontline leaders, where it's a lot of times just building a baseline of skills, leadership skills, because that hasn't maybe been there or hasn't been developed in the past. But we partner with organizations of all different types of sizes, global versus non, and we'll really get in right on the front end with the customer, understand again, what are the challenges? What are your strategic priorities? What are then the leadership implications and challenges? And then what are your ultimate goals when it comes to leadership development? And then we'll design and work sort of by their side to be able to curate the right experiences and make sure we're driving towards the right outcomes.
When somebody's looking at this, when your ideal customer client is looking at this pyramid and the different assessments and the development pathways, DDI is not the only company out there that has solutions like this, but it's unique in my assessment. For the audience, what features or insights makes this unique compared to what else is out there, and more importantly, the traditional leadership development pathways?
Yeah, I think of a few areas because you're right. There's a lot of different organizations out there that focus in the leadership space. I'd say what differentiates us, first and foremost, is the breadth to be able to work across the full leadership pipeline and not only have solutions that work across, but also work within. So understanding a lot of organizations, what we focus on is how do you build a common leadership language within your organization? And then how do you align all assessments and development experiences to that? So being able to work across the pipeline really helps bring that to life. But then recognizing these capabilities, these skills, they come to life in different ways depending on where you sit in the organization, what level you're in. Frontline leaders world is very different from a senior leaders world. And so we've got to account for that. So we've got a really strong breadth of solutions that hit across those areas. We are big believers in research and data and science. So all of our solutions are strongly backed by research, not just ours as well, but making sure we're aligning to trends in the market as well from that perspective. And another really important point of view that we feel is really important is it's not about assessment and development in isolation.
Mm.
It's about the integration of those things. That's where you're really going to get the power of being able to pair really good insight, really good intelligence about where your leader strengths and gaps are, and then be able to pair that, almost using that as a really strong GPS around what are the right development experiences I need to curate for my leaders, and how are we going to make that feel personalized and give them flexibility? Because quite frankly, the days of just doing pure cohort-based episodic leadership development where you pull people off the floor for 3 days, especially in a manufacturing environment, quite frankly, those days are gone. There are still organizations that do versions of that, especially if they're building core skills, and we partner with them as well. But we have really seen a dramatic shift from that approach to really getting more into what we call as a blended approach on
Okay.
how to really drive development. And that's so the visual I have on the screen kind of brings that to life, where the power really is in the mix. And we're in a really good position to do that, where we can blend live sessions in person, whether that's in person or virtual, where you're building core skills, more bite-sized learning that's coming from micro courses, practical tools. Many of them could be AI generated as well from that space, and then connecting them with their peers as well to be able to share challenges and coach each other. And what we found is the blend of those, that's where the real power of the mix is. And we feel like we're really, with our breadth of offerings, we can provide a lot of options and flexibility to organizations.
Awesome. Um, so bringing this back to those focuses for 2026, how do you ensure that this leadership development pathway and aligns with that business strategy and the needs for manufacturers that they've got in 2026 and beyond?
It's a great question. And then probably, if it's okay with you, maybe I'll bring this to life with an example
Yeah, please.
that can kind of provide some color around those pieces. So I have an example here on the screen that just gives you the high level lay of the land for this particular customer. This is a Fortune 500 global manufacturer. I'm not going to use names here for confidentiality purposes, but they do over 64 billion revenue each year. Very much a global footprint. Over 40% of their workforce is outside the US as well. So
Okay.
global
Yep.
scalability was a big focus here. But basically, they had some real key challenges that they needed help in addressing from a leadership standpoint. Their business is growing rapidly. They want to continue that growth, but they had very high levels of attrition, um, especially at the frontline leader level. And you'll see that about 90% of their frontline leaders had only been with the organization for fewer than 2 years.
That's
So
wild.
the historical knowledge wasn't there, but also the experience wasn't there as well. And they hadn't done a lot with frontline leadership development, quite frankly, right? So an untouched population within the organization. So their goal was key: invest in frontline leaders, and we're going to see the payoff in terms of better retention, better engagement, and also better productivity as a result of better leadership skills. That was their ultimate sort of North Star. So we worked with them really closely to design an enterprise frontline leader program focusing on their core skills that aligns with their core leadership model within the organization. So it didn't feel like something that was separate or in a vacuum. So anchored on the skills that were important to them. And that was a key place that we worked with them to make sure we were in lockstep, and did some discovery work with them as well to define what those skills were. Make sure there's a program in place that was targeting the right things, had the right blend of learning experiences, but also wasn't going to feel overwhelming. And that's an easy sentence to say, but the devil really is in the details to make sure you found the right balance there. And then helping them with the influence strategy to get the buy-in that they needed as well. And what we were able to share was of a lot of data from our side too that shows if you invest in this way, these are the outcomes from a business standpoint that you achieve. So I'm going to show you that program here too, just a high-level snapshot so you can see how it comes to
Perfect.
life.
Yeah.
But the results are really compelling. Within the first 2 years, they had basically trained over 2,800 frontline managers. That was above their target. And that was 142 cohorts, global cohorts. And so there was a lot of manpower behind this,
Yeah.
where we were really by the side of this particular customer. Feedback has really just been tremendous. And also we've been able to adapt and scale. They've touched over 9,000 leaders now within the organization. So expanding behind the front line as well. So it's a really powerful example that we're continuing to just come alongside with them as they adapt and adjust their leadership approach. And also there was, I think, a really solid program that we were help them develop that again was finding that sweet spot. So there's a lot on the screen here, but I'll just break it down is the meat of that experience, that what we call as a learning journey for those frontline leaders. That's what's in the middle of the screen here. So there were three broad buckets of capability around how they're equipping leaders to lead the business, how do they also lead teams, and then how are they also leading themselves, right? So those were three core areas that we needed to align to. And there were programmatic elements there that you'll see there at the top that were classroom-based experiences that got into skills like communication and coaching and driving change. And then there are really specially selected reinforcement tools that were more digital tools that they could access real time. And quite frankly, that's a key. The programmatic elements are so important to build the core skills. But in our point of view is if you don't provide just-in-time tools that leaders can access in the moment, then we are missing the boat on the real practical utility and the practical payoff, especially in a manufacturing environment where time is just so precious from that standpoint. If they don't have the right tools they can get their hands on within a few minutes to have a tough coaching conversation with their direct report that they're having in 15 minutes, or maybe they have an important conversation they need to influence a key stakeholder and they're struggling on how and to approach that, giving them the tools real time to be able to do that is where we see the biggest payoffs. And so we worked really closely with this customer on the design of that experience. But also, if you look at the bookends of this visual, we worked really closely on how they were going to engage the organization, get the buy-in with a really intentional kickoff that involves senior leaders, as well as manager support. That's a key place we see that breaks down a lot is the manager support just isn't there from the level above the leaders that are going through the program. So working closely with them to make sure the managers are engaged. And then on the back end, how are we continuing to measure skill development, response to the program, but also behavior change? Ultimately, that's the ultimate goal. I mean, that's why we're really in this business is to drive behavior change with leaders. And so we've got tools and we worked with this customer around how to measure that and how to keep the learning going beyond just within the experience itself.
Love all of that. And one thing you said is echoing in my brain right now, and that's just in time accessibility. We talk about needing screws just in time or material just in time in manufacturing every day, right? Um, Very seldomly are they looking at development in that same way. And I I didn't connect it until just now, but that's a super important part of development is having those resources, not having to comb through a notebook, a file that you've got behind your desk, that is a 3-ring binder that's 150 pages thick, and you have to leaf through, okay, how do I have this difficult conversation? How do I frame performance management conversations? How do I to have that kind of education at the tips of their fingers really enables the frontline manager or manager in general to be more effective because they can draw on that learning so much easier. Is that, am I picking that up correctly?
You nailed it. And in fact, it's like that's where from leaders going through programs like this, typical feedback we get is, wow, the sessions were so powerful. And I really enjoyed connecting with my peers to get a baseline around these skills. Because remember, these are often new skills when you're
Right.
talking about frontline leaders. They're new skills and they're hard skills. Learn, right? And so, but the feedback we get is I so appreciate after the classroom session where we all disperse and go back to our day jobs, right? I've got real leadership challenges that I am feeling blind on how to best approach. So the practical tools gives me just what I need to ground me with not too much detail, right? Just a practical model structures and tools that allow them to get the insight they need to have those hard conversations or to have a really effective coaching moment with their team from that standpoint. And frankly, that's where AI has helped raise the game as well. I mean, we've developed an AI leadership chatbot as well that's part of our platform that all customers have access to. You can type in there a real time challenge and it will pull the right information, tools, assets that's available through that customer subscription with us that they have in their hands real time, and they'll get coaching and guidance real time as well too. So it's a combination of that just in time concept, but it's evolving to a technology and AI and other tools that are really helping bring that to life for leaders.
Wow. That's super awesome, man. what's the first noticeable change that organizations see or a team would see once they implement your approach, DDI's approach?
Yeah, I think in a couple of areas. One is, and this I picked this example too because it highlights some of the common pain points
Hmm.
too for leaders in this space. But ultimately, a lot of leaders are we want to organizations want to really focus on improving the coaching at the front line. That's just a really core skill, probably not a surprise to you from that standpoint. So some of the earliest indicators that we see beyond just general response to the learning program, which we also measure as well, but how is the communication improving with their teams? So whether that's one-on-one or as a group,
Hmm.
are they seeing an uptick in those skills, which that's generally a focus right out of the gate in those platforms. They're also the coaching conversations, have they also increased? And are you seeing the results, the impact of that? So are you starting to see not only the leader's capability, but also the capability of their teams? Because now leaders are set up to be better coaches, and that's right. So I'd say initially starting to see the dial from a move the dial on the capability front, but then that also impacts overall engagement, morale, and retention as well. So those are some of the most common sort of, I would say, proof points that we look for and are measuring so that if we need to help a customer adjust an approach or put more emphasis in a certain area, we've got the right intelligence to be able to help them make those types of decisions. But then those scale up obviously over longer term to hitting some of those productivity outcomes as well that are so important to the business
Yeah.
as well, but just take a little bit more time to take root from that
Yeah.
standpoint.
Wow. Um, so how does this approach reduce the stress of the direct reports for the new leaders or the newly developed leaders that you guys are working with?
Yeah. Think about, what you're looking from a leader or even like the best leaders you've had in your career,
Hmm.
right? What are the things that they tended to do well? They probably were really good. They probably were a really good coach, right? They were able to coach you through the right experiences. They were probably really in tune to how to give you the right advice for the right moments and at the right level of detail so that it was felt practical to your world. They were thinking about your development. So not just helping you through day to day, they were thinking, what's the bigger picture for you as well? And so those are some of the biggest payoffs that we're helping our leaders to be able to, or our customers' leaders rather, to be able to address and have that kind of impact with their teams.
Hmm.
Those are the places we're helping them to help move the dial. In addition to areas that might just be related to very baseline things like how do you have a tough performance conversation? If I'm struggling and I have a really poor performance conversation with my leader, I'm going to leave there feeling disengaged. Probably my morale's down, and I might be thinking about, well, I need to start looking somewhere else
Hmm.
because versus, hey, they're being clear on what the gap is and then having a really strong approach in place to be able to close those gaps. And I think that's equipping leaders to be able to have those conversations too is really key.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. As we are wrapping up here, Patrick, what's one of the bigger takeaways that you want leaders in manufacturing to understand about investing in leadership?
Couple of pieces. So one, I'll leave you with what we have found to be sort of the top skills to be focused on in 2026. I don't think I can leave this podcast without speaking to that a little bit. Well, from that standpoint, and this overlaps. You mentioned Gallup earlier. This overlaps with other research as well in this space, but specifically for manufacturing too. These skills on the screen here, these are the ones that we found to be most consistent across leadership levels in terms of where leaders and organizations are seeing that they need to put the most energy and focus. And probably some of these aren't surprising to you as well, but just highlights the importance around key areas like managing change, but also building trust, where we've seen a huge drop in perceptions of trust, specifically at the manager level as well. But I think what's interesting as you see here is those kind of what's the right word? Dash boxes there. That shows the percentage of leaders who said this was a critical skill to develop. And then to your earlier point, the blue bars are the leaders who've received training in that area. And you'll see there's a pretty big delta there to your earlier point about exposure to leadership training. So it highlights a key challenge, I think, for organizations and for us as their partner helping you identify what are the right skills, so where to focus, and then making sure the right experiences are curated for leaders and organizations to be able to develop those skills. So I think that's one key takeaway is thinking about this in the context of your
Hmm.
own organization. I would say too, just as I've mentioned before, leadership is hard in general, but I think it
Hmm.
is particularly challenging in a manufacturing environment. And that's because given the context, and it's just sort of especially where we are with things in the external environment and the ecosystem right now, there's some pretty significant implications for leaders in manufacturing organizations. And you'll see, I just highlighted kind of those top takeaways there on the screen. Some of these we've already talked about, but I'll highlight this need to reskill and upskill. That's, I think, a really important concept to have on the radar because, as we mentioned, early generation leaders they're not jazzed by maybe what they've seen in the past. So there's a mandate we have to be able to redefine what good leadership looks like and what that looks like in the demands of a traditional manufacturing environment, which is also evolving and changing from
Hmm.
that perspective. There's also a really strong now blend between traditional industrial skills, but the tech skills are becoming more and more important. So, how are you painting that picture and how are you equipping leaders to be able to look for those skills, but then also be able to develop those types of employees and across the workforce as well and scale it from that perspective. Um, and the final one I'll share is personalization. So, customers are expecting more personalized experiences too from their partners. Leaders have the same expectation. So that's the one size fits all approach to leadership development that's a thing of the past, in our opinion. It's more about how you develop consistent experiences that you can scale across the
Hmm.
organization, but allow for flexibility, practicality, and optionality
Got
for
it.
leaders to be able to take advantage of what's going to be most beneficial in their particular.
Yeah, got it. What is your you're giving advice to a new leader on the shop floor, brand new, young, next gen leader? What is the one tip you would give to that 20 something brand new emerging leader in the manufacturing space?
The bottom line question here. All right, let me think about that. If I had to narrow it to one, I'd probably say don't be afraid to ask for help. And I know that sounds basic, but I think there's sometimes a pressure within organizations, especially in a new leadership role, you need to prove yourself, right? And some of that is true. You need to establish that you have the capability to be successful in the role. And that doesn't go away. But the challenges are new and the landscape is going to be new if you've not led people before. So being able to tap into the expertise of your manager or a mentor, someone more seasoned in the organization, not being afraid to reach out to seek advice on how to address those challenges that you can then make your own, but not feeling like you have to navigate that in isolation because it's
Yeah,
actually more damaging from that
yeah,
perspective, and it puts undue pressure as well that can get in the way of really that person's true capability.
yeah, got it. Um, how can people get a hold of you and or DD?
But yeah, absolutely. Well, you can go check out our website. So that's ddiworld.com. And so if you want to get more information about what we do, how we partner with customers, absolutely. You can find me on LinkedIn. My presence is out there as well. I engage with a lot of people in that interface also. And just love having the conversations
Awesome.
too from that standpoint. So happy to connect.
Yeah, awesome. Patrick, what didn't I ask you that you want to share with the audience?
I think we covered a lot of ground.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think just reinforcing the point about that leadership is hard, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yes.
it can sometimes be deprioritized. So just making sure that you're making the right case in your organization to be able to make sure this is top of mind and it does tie to the bigger picture outcomes and not to lose sight of how if you invest in leaders, that's an investment in the future of the organization and the outcomes as well. And that link sometimes get lost in some of the day-to-day challenges that are very fair challenges, but it shouldn't overshadow the need for really strong leadership development within organizations.
Absolutely. Man, Patrick, this was a great conversation. Thanks for being on today. Really appreciate you. So thank you.
My pleasure. This was great. Great dialogue and really nice to have the conversation with you, Jim. It was great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, check out DDI and their website, explore their leadership tools, their insights with the reports that they do. Also, subscribe to the Manufacturing Connector, this show. Check out our other podcasts, the Manufacturing Culture Podcast and Work But Make It Human, to see how we bring leadership technology together to make manufacturing a smarter, safer, and more human place to work. See you next time. This has been the Manufacturing Connector.